All right, so the Disneyland analogy, let's go ahead and I'll just cross this out. I'm all done with that for the most part. I'll reference this periodically just so you know, but this is so you can kind of keep up on this. The Disneyland analogy works like this. When you go into Disneyland, you can get Disney bucks, right? You can change, so you can change that you have your time that you exchanged at your job, and then you're going to, for dollars, and then you're going to take those dollars, you're going to exchange them for Disney bucks, and you can spend them in Disneyland. Now, so if you go to Main Street in Disneyland, right, and you've got your Disney bucks, for example, and you see all those little shops, all those quaint little shops that look like little villages and everything, and you go in there, you spend your money in these little shops. You're spending your Disney bucks in these shops. Now, why do they accept those Disney bucks? Well, because it's Disneyland. You're in the park, right? So you're able to do all of that. It's no big thing. But those are only good inside the park. You understand that if you go into Geppetto's clock shop to buy something, Geppetto's clock shop isn't owned by Geppetto. Right, it's not owned by a guy named Geppetto. It's owned by a giant multinational mega corporation called Disney. That's who owns that. So they also own the currency. So what ends up happening is that you're playing a game inside their rules. Well, so if you go out of Disneyland, well, then you have a different set of rules entirely, right? A whole different set of rules outside the park. This isn't a criticism of Disneyland. I'm just using them as an analogy. You're not buying anything. So it's just like if you're going to pick a gigantic mega corporation of some kind that is owned by BlackRock or Vanguard or something, where the majority shares are owned by like 5 or 6 companies. You're using dollars that in many cases they control. They control the issuance of. Remember, I mean, it's all one system. These people, this is an incestuous relationship that has existed for a long time, and most of these people they don't know anything else. They don't know how to be productive. They don't know how to be productive. All they know how to do is just keep running scams and just keep the scam going. That's it. So, if you go out into the real world, for example, and you're spending dollars at these giant companies, well, of course they're taking the dollars. That's what gives the illusion that it has value. We're going to address the illusion of value, by the way, real quickly. So that's why people will say, well, no, but I can still use my dollar to buy a home. Like, well, yes, you can. But if you notice, the price of the housing is going up, but the wages are going down, or they're staying flat. So, like, well, but that's a supply and demand thing. It's really not. Because remember, we have demographics going down. There should be a surplus of houses. Once again, I hate to just dump this on mass illegal immigration, but if the shoe fits, right? I mean, there's a lot of problems with this. If all of a sudden all the subsidies, you don't even have to do deportations. If you just cut off every subsidy across the board, all of a sudden something magical happened. A lot of people will leave, and then you'll see all those apartment complexes that just got built will be virtually empty. They'll be $100 a month, for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, 1,250 square feet. They won't be able to find people to rent them because there's actually a surplus that doesn't need to exist. That they're having to bring people in and pay them to come to the country to make it look like there's an economy. And it's just to prop up real estate values. And this, of course, is also to prop up the banks. And why does it prop up the banks? Because the banks have made loans on this real estate. And if that property value starts dropping drastically, they have to start taking those write-downs. They have to start going, oh, well, hold on a second here. This is where you have people like they're excited about how, man, I locked in my 2.3% interest rate on my 30-year mortgage. Well, that's great. But now if you want to sell that house to another person, to another person or couple, you're going to have to bring that price down by like half to make that viable when the interest rates have gone up. Well, otherwise they're just not going to be able to buy it. Or you have to wait for a demographic implosion or explosion where you have more and more people. Well, but if that doesn't happen, well, then you're kind of stuck there, right? Well, I could rent it out. Well, yeah, but rents are going to come down too, along with that. That's how that works. Again, this is in a real economy, not a fake economy, not this clown world nonsense that we have now. In a real economy, you would see all. In fact, in a real economy, in 2008, you would have seen all this implode. The whole thing just would. There'd have been nothing, and houses would have gone down to what they cost probably in 1975. I mean, they would have just dropped to almost nothing. But that's not what happened. We'll just continue to blow it up. I've mentioned this in another video. Well, when you don't want to have, you don't want to have that happen. But it's going to continue happening until this whole thing dies. So that's basically the Disneyland analogy of where all this is going. This is an action-reaction relationship. That's all it is. Now you could say, look, well, how do we conceptualize, like, how did all of this happen? Well, actually, believe it or not, right up here at the very top is something that says the marshmallow test. For those of you who don't know what the marshmallow test is, let me just explain to you the idea of how it's supposed to work in theory. The theory is it's supposed to gauge intelligence in little kids. You have a little kid, and then what you tell him is, okay, I'm going to give you a marshmallow right now, or you can wait 10 minutes, and I will give you 2 marshmallows. Check it out. That's the theory. And the theory is that the kid can wait 10 minutes, then they're intelligent. It's actually a bad read. I'm going to go against a whole bunch of psychologists and clinicians on this, but I mean, you've got a bad read. Let me explain to you why you got a bad read. The read you're getting isn't a function of intelligence. It's a function of trust. It's a function of whether or not that kid believes you're going to make good on that second marshmallow. How would you test for that? Well, you'll never get it past an ethics board, but how would you test for it? Well, you would do it this way. You would offer the kid a marshmallow. And then after 10 minutes, do the whole thing, 10 minutes, and then they come back and they're like, okay, where's my 2 marshmallows? Then you eat both the marshmallows and give the kid the finger and say, piss off, kid. That's what you do. And then you go back and do the exact same test a couple of weeks later. And you do, and then when you offer the kid the first marshmallow, you see if the kid says, okay, listen, dude, I'm going to take that 1 marshmallow right now, and you can take your other one and just shove it just right back up your ass, because I don't believe anything comes out of your fucking blowhole. That would be a sign of intelligence. True story, because that's exactly what it would be. So I'm going to take you into negotiation a little bit here. This is something that you probably need to understand here. You want to get into the meat and potatoes here? Because I know that there's a bunch of people that are like, well, I want to know how to be rich. Like, dude, the fastest way to be rich, first of all, is not be ripped off constantly. How about we get that part down first? Let's just get down to the point where you're not being robbed every 5 minutes of the day. Then you can focus on the rest of it. I think you'll learn it kind of just through osmosis. But if you can just learn how to not be ripped off every minute of the day, well, then you'll be much further along in life. So, how would you negotiate that in real world? So let's take a real world scenario. You go to a company and you want to work for them, and they say that, here's what we're offering. You say, no, you're not offering enough. Hey, look, I want to have the idea is let me finish this up. You say, no, I want more money because I want to be able to have the life that my parents had. I don't want more of their lifestyle. I just want the same life they had. My dad was able to have a wife who didn't work outside the home, 2-3 kids. They were able to have a couple of cars, and they were able to go on a vacation. That's it. Nothing huge. I didn't say Crawford Ranch is your own private estate. I didn't say, buying a county in Northern California is your private estate. I didn't say that. I'm talking about just being able to have the same kind of life that your parents had. Well, a lot of that was a lie. And remember, they had to get people to do a bunch of work, and they had no way to pay these people. So, which is, of course, why Bretton Woods broke down. Another reason, it's in addition to the other reasons, but it's another reason why, I think it's 71, where the whole thing basically broke down, and they had to come off the gold standards because, well, they'd made all these promises. They had no way of actually paying any of this stuff. So, what I would say is that start looking at your life like a business, right? So instead of looking at your life like an employee, that I'm going to go to a company and I'm going to just take whatever they offer me and do this job, start looking at your life the way that you would look at it as if your life was a business. What would you do if your life was a business? Well, you would take your cost. You have all your costs for the month. Let's say it's $4,000. I'm picking a number arbitrarily. It's completely out of nowhere. That's your cost every month. You have to make this plus a profit. or it's not worth doing. Now you could say like, well, you could just reduce your costs. Yeah, I know, but at a certain point, you can only reduce them so much. Every business, every small business runs into this. At a certain point, you can no longer reduce costs. You run out of places to reduce. You've already sold your boat, you've sold your house, you've sold your cars, you're down to riding a bike to your business, and your employees are making 3 times the amount of money you're making, and they're making minimum wage. You can only go so low before you're just like, fuck it, I'm out. Well, that's reality. So figure out whatever your costs are, and you're going to tell them, okay, look, this is my, you tell them the same way of business, just the same kind of negotiation. Well, my costs are this. This is what I have to make in profit. I need to make at least, $1,000 a month in profit. So that means I'm going to need $5,000 a month net. That's the minimum that I'm going to need to work here as a gas station attendant. Otherwise, forget it. Go find one of these. Go find a crackhead. There's plenty of crackheads that'll work here for a little while and everything. They'll rob you blind. But or they'll figure out a way to have a bunch of cash that's here and stuff, and then somebody will come in and just conveniently rob them. Like, come on! I mean, this is the same kind of. It's no different than trying to run like a back alley dice game, right? You know how that works? It's like FTX. You run a back alley dice game, and what you do is after you run it really clean for a while, and you get more and more people involved playing the dice game. Oh, before you know it, you got lots and lots and lots of people here. Then you got maybe a few whales that show up here and there with lots of money, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, you get robbed, and well, yeah, you had your cousin, show up and rob everybody, including you. Why? Because then now the money, it's like, oh man, I got robbed. Oh, we're all horrible. It's terrible. And then you go meet up with your cousin later on, and you divvy up the loot. It's like, this is not a hard concept. This is really easy to figure out. So no, you tell them, you say, hey, look, this is my cost. This is what I need for profit. That's the end of it. Otherwise, find a crackhead. There's plenty of crackheads. Lots of them out there. Meth junkies and whatever. You can go find one of them. So, and that's how you're going to negotiate. You don't have a choice. You just have to look at it from a business standpoint. Look at your life as a business. You have costs. Those costs you can only reduce so much. Okay, so you stopped going to $6 to buy the tall boy frappuccino. Okay, great. You stopped that. You stopped. You stopped paying for cable. You shut off Hulu. You shut off Netflix. You've deleted everything fun about life, and all it is just you living in a pod eating bug salad or something. You can't go any real lower than that. You own nothing. You're not happy, and in the meantime, you're just sort of, and you're working 10 hours a day. And then you add your commute on top of it, assuming you have a little battery car, a little proletariat mobile to go to work, assuming you have that, and you can afford the $400 a month in insurance because of inflation, assuming you can do all of that, all you're doing is you're just working. You're not actually living a life. You're working. And that's it. Well, no, it's not going to work long term. Long term, people are going to just say they're going to check out and say no, fuck it, and that's where a lot of people are at now, right? Now, for the boomers who don't understand this, what am I got in time? For boomers who don't understand this, what you're thinking is you're stuck in a position of thinking, well, but I'm paying more dollars. No, you're not. You're paying more dollars, but the value is dropping. I've already covered this. And that's just going to get worse. The valuations are going to continue to drop. As the valuation drops, lifestyle declines. In order to explain this, I'm going to do this in the next video. I'm going to explain the burger place analogy. I'm going to break down 3 different burger places, how this works, because it's something that I'm convinced is not understood by a lot of people. The methodology that's being used to have, like, how is it that this can happen to so many people? And why is it that everything is failing? Remember, small businesses are failing. This is by design, right? It's a natural outcome of when you subsidize your giant competitors, right? So it's like, once again, let's say it costs you $5 to make a burger, right? You're a burger joint owner. Costs you $5 to make that burger. That's including all of your costs. That's the heat, the electric, the gas bill, the dumpster fees, your triple net, your lease, all of it. All of your costs compressed into this one burger are $5, let's say. So you have to sell it for a higher price. You have no choice. You have to sell it for a profit. Let's say you sell it for $8. Okay, so you make a $3 gross profit on the deal. Okay, What happens if somebody, somebody like, I just show up and I say, hey, no matter what happens to the dollar, I'll make sure that you can sell your burger for $8. Well, then you don't care what happens to costs. Costs can go completely crazy. Now, can any of your competitors do that? No, they can't. But you can keep doing that. Let's enter the stock market, and just funneling more and more and more money into these gigantic companies, and giving, again, the illusion that the costs haven't really gone up. I mean, though even with them, a lot of them are still showing signs of fatigue on this. That's why you're seeing the product become questionable at best. Certainly with some of these places, questionable product. The sizing of the product, the overall product, the overall product is completely different. You see it at the grocery store. You can see things that used to cost, they were $3, now they're $6, but they're half the size. So you have like 150% inflation, real inflation on the ground that you can actually feel. This is observable. It's objective. It isn't my opinion. You can go and look at this stuff yourself. It's not hard, and anybody who's actually on the ground, who's a field researcher, well, that's going to apply to that. And by the way, that exists even for you, because you are, whether you want to believe it or not, you are born a scientist. You're born that way. You exist as a scientist. You come out of the womb a scientist, because everything goes in the mouth, right? Everything goes in the mouth. Little kids, that's what they do, right? Little babies, and everything goes in the mouth because the senses are fully formed. So what ends up happening is that you're exploring the world around you. You're only born with two fears: fear of falling, fear of loud noises. After that, every other fear is kind of given to you. 70 to 90%, I hear, of human communication isn't even verbal. So the cues are coming from whatever's around you. That's where the cues are. So if it's coming from your parents, if your parents are concerned about something, it's going to project onto you. Or more than likely, since the government seems to have kids for a really long time, by the way, for longer than I would say, strictly speaking, would be comfortable, and you should be homeschooling your kids. But like all of that programming is going into kids, which is why you got a bunch of people who don't understand some of this stuff. Some of the stuff that I'm talking about is actually really basic. Like this is like super basic stuff. It's like Business 100 kind of stuff. But it's not really being taught because a lot of the math isn't being taught, and you've got unfortunately a bunch of young folks who don't understand any of this, and they're like, well, I don't know, I'm working, I'm doing a job, but I'm not able to actually have any kind of life. Well, that's an inflation issue, and inflation, taxes, interest rates, insurance premiums issue. It's all of the costs. They all want money, no matter what. That's how it works. So, and I'll go into that a little bit more, but I mean, if you understand any business can only pay out so much. Businesses aren't cash machines. They can't just create, unless you want to have the ultimate business. The ultimate business would be getting your hands on a rotary offset printing press, putting it in your basement, and printing dollars. Well, okay, there's a great business model. But if you're wanting to be honest, then you have to go out and actually have a real business. And in a real business, you have your costs, and you can only pay out so much. There's only so much you can pay in taxes, insurance, interest rates. There's only so much you can handle in compounded food cost or whatever it is, your cost for to make your hard cost to make your product. Plus you've got your lease payments. On and on and on. There's only so much you can pay, and then on top of that, then you got to pay out all your labor. And there's only so much you can pay. Well, the hard costs, and the banks and the investors and the shareholders, like the bondholders and so on, they all demand money. You have to pay them. Employees always take a back seat. This is, by the way, it's where unions came from. I'm not even making a moral judgment as to whether unions are good or not. I'm pointing out this is where they came from. They came from because you had a bunch of people saying, hey, we want our money. Big corporate America was, the investor class was saying, the investor class, I use that term loosely because they were printing money out of nothing and shoveling it into businesses and then getting the businesses to owe them debt on money that they created out of nothing. So whatever, the investor class wanted their money. They demanded their pound of flesh. But in the meantime, the employees, the businesses would say, well, we don't have enough money to pay the employees. We'd keep giving them all kinds of promises. Believe it or not, in a weird way, if you understand it, the system turns businesses into little Ponzi schemes, whether they know it or not, where the business always has to be under constant growth. It always has to be growing. It can't stop. It has to keep going. And as soon as it stops growing, that's what happens. And because you eventually run out. And you have to start selling stuff off. You have to start closing things back in. That's what ends up happening. Or you have to just keep money coming in from somewhere else, which is where the wokeification of all these companies have come from. They know they need the money. And the agenda right now is to push, woke clown world nonsense. So if you're going to push woke clown world nonsense on people, then you have to get these companies in line. And if they're not going to get in line because you weren't able to get them on video, with some kid at Epstein's Island, then you have to say, hey, here's a bunch of money, here's a bunch of money, here's a bunch of money, and then all of a sudden, we're not going to give you any more money until you do what we say. That's how it works. And then these companies, of course, they're like, well, they're screwed now. They either go under, and then of course on top of that, the laws there's so many laws. There's what is it, like 80 million estimated laws, that if a CEO of one of these big companies takes a stand and says, that's it, I'm not doing it, I'm not doing the wokeification nonsense, take your woke shit and shove it just right back up your ass. If he does that, they take away all the money, they take away all the subsidies, they take away all that stuff, and then they let that company go under. Then what happens is that the media pops up and says, "Oh my God, this CEO was guilty of malfeasance somehow. Look at this, he violated this law, subsection such and such of some SEC code, yada yada yada." And then all of a sudden he's indicted, and then he goes to jail. And the public say, "That's right, stick it to corporate America," even though it's like, no, that was the one guy who stood up and said, "I'm not going to play ball with all your horse shit." That's that's you, America. I don't know what else to tell you. That's how you operate. And so instead of looking at it a little deeper, you always have to look at this stuff a little deeper than what I'm not saying you don't have to be an obsessive like me. You don't have to get into every little thing, but you do have to understand some of this stuff, and you have to be able to question how these things work out. And keep in mind that a lot of this stuff probably didn't work quite the way that you thought it did. You thought you saw something, but you didn't. And keep in mind, remember the sources of a lot of this stuff. A lot of big corporate media, they have an agenda to keep all this stuff around. How many banks and insurance companies own media? They have a reason to protect all this stuff. Remember, it's a giant game that they've created, and the game is to protect the dollar. That's what all this comes down to. So, it's sort of like, so my colleague, Jordan Peterson, he has this idea well, there's the game, and then there's this meta game, and you want everybody to play the, little kids, you want them to play the meta game, so they want them to keep getting, well, yeah, but what if the meta game is rigged? What if why would you want to continue playing a game with a bunch of little bastards that have rigged the game to make sure that they always win? See, that's never asked in the psychological world from what I've seen. It's always something about, they assume that the test that they're doing, they assume the answer they're getting is the answer that they think they're going to get. Right? It's kind of like the Milgram experiment. The Milgram experiment, you would never imagine that somebody would be willing to actually murder somebody, but yet 70% will. It's been proven. If they're given permission, oh yeah, murders this person, okay, and they'll just kill him, and they don't have a problem with it, as long because somebody in a white lab coat told them it was okay. These kinds of problems all factor into all this stuff. So when going through and understanding this stuff, or trying to, I realize I'm hard to follow. Hey, I own that, and you'll probably have to go back and ask a few questions, I imagine, but. Suffice it to say, this is how this stuff works, and you have to be able, and if you understand this, you're going to find out that a lot of the stuff that you're going to hear from any direction isn't really going to match a lot of this, because you're going to have to look at it from yourself and say, well, hey, look, no, this is the negotiation I'm doing. This is my cost. This is what I want. And if you're not going to do this, I'm not going to play ball with you. Find somebody else. Find another sucker. And they will, by the way, just so you know. They'll just keep doing that, and they'll keep replacing people until they run out of people to replace with, or the competency level gets so horrible You know, this is why like, you know, a lot of companies are kind of figuring this out now. They're figuring that like they've got all these different jobs. They've got a bunch of people showing up for puppy therapy, and you know the rooftop martini lounge, and showing up for mimosas Monday morning, and you know box wine on tap and all that crazy shit. And these people aren't really doing much. It's like Gymboree for adults. They're just sort of hanging out. You know, they answer an email, or they might return a phone call. I mean, God forbid people return phone calls. But they're not actually really doing a whole lot of actual value. So that's being learned now because of all of this. And the people that are actually the ones that you want, the ones that will be productive, well, you can't afford us anymore. You can't afford us, because I look at, as a businessman, I look at it's why I'm in business. It's why I've been in business my whole life, because I look at corporate America and like, nope, you can't afford my costs. My costs are a little different than what you're willing to actually afford, so or willing to pay. And on top of that, I'm not going to be a very popular guy in your office building, because, you know, I mean, look at my personality. I mean, I know I look all cute and cuddly, but I'm pretty venomous. But I'm just telling you, you know, like, this is kind of how this works. So, you know, like when you have your costs, start thinking about that in a business standpoint. Start thinking about that, and start thinking about it in terms of like, if you owned a restaurant, would you let someone come into your building and say, hey, that's great, I got my meal, that's awesome, now I'm going to pay you this, I'm going to give you like, you know, $5 of this $15 meal, but the other 10, I'm going to give you like $15 later on, and it's going to be awesome. No, you would never agree to that. You would never agree to that. You would never agree to it. You would never agree to that. Why? Because you're looking at that going, no, I have costs right now that I need to address currently. Okay, I will do my own saving, thank you very much. You don't need to do any saving for me. Enter the scam of the 401k idea, which is where it's like, well, we'll pay, we're gonna match it dollar for dollar, but then we're gonna put it in the stock market, which is just gonna get funneled back into a bunch of hedge funds and mutual funds that are gonna shove it back into a bunch of these companies and make them bigger and bigger and bigger, when many of them should have actually failed. They don't have a viable product. They can't actually afford to do what it is that they think that they're doing. This is a big problem, and it's like, that's capitalism. It's not. It's not when you're doing that. It's taking advantage of people who don't understand the math behind it. Start telling them no. Say no. Hey, look, what can you afford? What's my maximum donation? What's my maximum contribution to my 401k? Oh, it's $1,000 a month. Great. Then that means you're going to match it dollar for dollar, right? Absolutely great. Give me the extra $1,000 then. Don't match 401k, just give me the extra $1,000, because you've already told me, you already admitted that you can afford $1,000 a month, so give me $1,000 a month now, because then I can take care of it, because the currency's devaluing. The currency's on its way down. It's worthless garbage, so you're going to need to pay me right now, and then we'll renegotiate next month. We'll see what inflation looks like. We'll renegotiate every quarter after that, and we'll see what we're like. Start negotiating like that, and I guarantee you, all of this stuff will start changing very quickly. Companies will figure it out. Most of them will go bankrupt. If 60% of you started doing this, companies will start going bankrupt everywhere. All these companies will start flaking out. They won't have any idea how to do any of this stuff. No, I mean, you don't even have to do anything. I'm not even saying loot the place. You don't have to. You just have to say, hey, no, look, I'm not doing it unless I'm getting this out of it. Fuck off. I'm not giving you 1 minute of my time. Well, then how do we do anything else and everything? Like, well, that's where organized crime comes in, and I can't talk to you about that on this video.